Hello and welcome to Freya's Tropical Garden. It's a sunny day here in Hampshire, for now at least, and the garden's looking fantastic. Now here's what we've got coming up on today's episode. I visit the beautiful gardens at RHS Wisley. We take an in-depth look on how to propagate cuttings using various methods, and there's another chance to enter my competition to win canna plants. But first, let's see how my garden's coming along since the last episode. The weather in the past couple of weeks has been a mixture of hot sunny days and some downpours, and finally the garden is starting to look a bit more like a jungle, although it is a little bit behind schedule on what it would normally be looking like at this time of year. Once again, I've had to have a major cut back of the foliage because the paths are difficult to make your way through. And if you're anything like me, you'll hate the number of these spiders that make their webs across the path. But now I can walk around without fear of what might be crawling over me. This year it's the first time I've planted my Alocasia macrorrhiza in the ground, and the leaves are now bigger than it's ever been. While the Alocasia that I left outside over winter is growing nicely. And by cutting back the foliage, I've also uncovered my cordyline red star, which has been growing nicely since its frost damage this winter, as well as really being able to appreciate the different textures of the foliage that are growing in the garden at the moment. A lot of the new dahlias that I planted in spring haven't grown this year, so I've gone out and I've bought these two new ones, Mystic Illusion, with this stunning contrast of the yellow flower against the dark foliage, and Mystic Enchantment with the red flowers. My Dahlia Happy Days has come back reliably for about 3 or 4 years now, and I absolutely love the colour of these red and yellow flowers. While the Twining Smarty is one of the few that I planted that has actually grown well this year, and it doesn't disappoint. And I picked this hosta up from Aldi a couple of weeks ago. The label didn't give the variety, but I think it might be Hosta Patriot. And while I was walking around the garden yesterday, I discovered that it was flowering already. For me, this was an important feature in the planting of my garden, to make sure you can't see everything from one spot, so you have to walk around to find things. My Salvia Amistad took a long time to get going this year. However, as you can see, it is now flowering, and there will be plenty more flowers coming soon, I hope. And my sunflowers are continuing to flower reliably. I did say in the last video I was disappointed with the colour of these because I did buy shades of red and brown. However, I have had some come through that are showing these deeper colours now. Like this one, which I think might be Black Magic. And this one, the Velvet Queen, with these lovely deep red petals that are just gorgeous. Although I grow my sweet corn more for the jungly foliage, they are now starting to produce some corn with these lovely fluffy corn silk heads. And the cannas are another one that's been very slow growing this year. My canna Russian red is now starting to get to a good height and is even starting to flower. I absolutely love the contrast of these bright orange, vibrant flowers on top of these dark red leaves. While the canna Cleopatra combines the best of the red and the green foliage with these red and yellow flowers. These add a splash of fantastic colour into the garden, and for me they're one of the most beautiful flowers that I grow in my garden. The pink cannas that I showed you last week are still flowering, and now the red cannas have opened up as well, so there is colour all over the garden at the moment. This red canna was actually the first canna that I got several years ago and started my love of cannas. I've divided it and grown many more of it since. Another plant that's got this lovely dark foliage with the red flowers is the Lobelia Queen Victoria. And while I've shown you a lot of the morning glories that I've got growing in my garden at the moment, this variety is actually a sweet potato. Since the last episode, my Nephophia nobilis has continued to flower beautifully. And now that we're actually having better weather, you can see how much it's capturing this lovely evening sunlight. However, in the last couple of days, this too is coming to an end now. But this yellow variety that had finished flowering a few weeks ago has actually now produced another flower. And microcosmia is starting to go to seed now, although there are still some flowers left dotted around the garden. And my Nicotianas are starting to flower now. This was bought from seed as Nicotiana glauca. However, Nicotiana glauca does normally have yellow flowers, whereas these are a lovely pink colour, so I think perhaps they might have been crossed with something else. But I'm definitely not disappointed because it's a real beauty. I absolutely love these delicate pink flowers. And the white Nicotiana sylvestris has started flowering. Although it hasn't reached the heights that it got to last year, it is still an absolutely stunning flower. And I love the colour of this cleome, which really brings an energy to the garden at the moment. And I found this Eucomis sparkling burgundy flower hiding under my Musa sycamensis. It's the only one of my pineapple lilies that's grown this year, but it's an absolute beauty. And of course, at this time of year, I've got quite a bit of edibles growing. I've got my runner beans ready now. My tomatoes are starting to ripen finally. This variety is called Great White, and it's the first time I've successfully managed to grow one of the beef tomatoes. And these yellow cherry tomatoes are absolutely delicious. So I've managed to collect my first harvest now. I've picked some of these just before they're ripe, so they can ripen on a sunny windowsill. And I've also started harvesting a lot of the chilies that I'm growing. I've got masses of these caramel scorpions now that are changing colour. They're absolutely gorgeous caramel brown, while these big black mamas are turning a nice dark chocolatey brown. And these really look like they're going to have some heat in them. I've got masses of these lovely Zimbabwe black chilies. They're small, but they really do pack a punch. I think the seeds I grew this Zimbabwe black from were crossed with a Slim Jim, which is the longest chilli in the world. The weather this year hasn't been great for chilies, and the hotter chilies especially really do like to have a lot of dry heat. I always place my plants in the sunniest area of the garden so they can get the most hours of sunlight during the day, and I water them only when they are bone dry and starting to wilt. This year I've had to move a lot of my plants indoors for periods of time to try and avoid these downpours of rain that we've been having, and then get them back outside as soon as we're getting some rays of sun for them to lap up. Fortunately this year that seems to have been enough, and they're now starting to ripen and we're getting these lovely variety of different colours. And for the ones that we've tried so far, there does still seem to be enough heat in them for them to be really enjoyable and tasty. If you want to know more about the different varieties of chili that I'm growing in my garden this year, I have added a resource onto my website, and I will continue to develop and build this resource. So if you're looking for information on different varieties that you might be interested in growing yourself, then please go over to my website and check it out. I've also listed a few of the plants that I've got for sale on Facebook Marketplace, so if you're interested in buying any of these, please head over to Facebook Marketplace and search for Freya's Tropical Garden. So my garden's coming on really well at the moment. Now coming up next, we're going to take a trip to RHS Wisley and have a look around their beautiful garden at some of their tropical plants. RHS Wisley is the flagship garden of the Royal Horticultural Society. It was given to the RHS in 1903 and has predominantly been used even to this day for experimentation and plant science. And it's a fantastic place to visit if you're looking for inspiration or to relax in the beautiful surroundings. This beautiful building housed the old laboratory, overlooking the terraced landscape of the tranquil Jellicoe Canal. This garden was set out by Sir Geoffrey Jellicoe in the 1970s, and here you can see several cultivars of water lily, all of them named. And the shelter provided in the walled garden makes it a perfect spot for some of the more tender plants and hosts 50 cultivars of hosta, as well as some Trachycarpus that were left over from the previous tropical theme planting. The beautiful oak wood was previously the wild garden, Wisley's first garden. Mounds, ponds and ditches were all created in order to grow difficult to grow plants. And the 7 acres garden is wide open with lawns and ponds, a lake, and a smaller round pond separated by a grass causeway with a small weir. In spring, you can see several peonies and alliums give it plenty of colour. And there's this beautiful Chinese pavilion, which was built in 2005 for the Hampton Court Palace Flower Show. And you can see these huge fish swimming in the pond. I'm no expert, I'm assuming maybe carp. Or, of course, you could just sit and feed the ducks. Wisley, just like a lot of places, are trying to encourage us to be a bit more environmentally friendly, so they do offer discounted entry if you take the shuttle bus from Woking train station. And then, of course, there's the main purpose of my visit today, the beautiful tropical glasshouse. And there is so much more to see besides, which I did not get time to on this visit. So I just want to talk a little bit now about some of the plants that I have seen today. Like this beautiful pink water lily called René Girard, which is flecked and striped with crimson. Or the beautiful white star-shaped flowers on the odorata, which is more suitable if you've got a small or shallow pond. This beautiful variegated cornus is also known as the wedding cake tree. It will grow about 4 to 8 meters tall and has these beautiful variegated ovate leaves. You will of course find several Trachycarpus fortunei, also known as the windmill palm, as it is generally considered to be the hardiest palm tree in the UK. This palm tree is low maintenance, fast growing, and grows up to about 8 meters tall. Although it can be a bit slow to get growing, it will normally grow about 30 centimetres a year and would be hardy down to about -12. If you've got patience, you can grow it from seed. You can see the massive cluster of seeds that this one's produced. One of the ways you can tell it apart from other Trachycarpus is that the leaves bend, while the Trachycarpus wagneranus has a much more rigid leaf. More commonly called the waggy, it's hardy down to about -15 degrees and a much more compact palm. The European fan palm is a multi-stemmed dwarf palm, hardy to about -9, while the beautiful blue-silver leaves of the Argentea variety provide a wonderful bit of foliage in the tropical garden. Just like the standard variety, this is a multi-stemmed palm tree and is also considered hardy in the UK. The Trachycarpus princeps hybrid has been bred to be a larger tree as well as a more hardy variety than the standard Trachycarpus princeps, while still retaining the attractive paler leaf. The Nephophia papaya popsicle is a smaller variety than the ones I grow in my garden, growing to about 60 centimetres tall, but reportedly flowering throughout summer and autumn. I was particularly taken with this Yucca gloriosa bright star with vibrant yellow foliage, which will display hues of pink if stressed by cold or water. And next to it, this breathtaking Agave attenuata with its big wide leaves. And this produces the beautiful pale yellow bell-shaped flowers on long stalks. The Grevillea johnsonii is a vigorous bushy shrub from Australia with narrow needle-like leaves and clusters of spidery flowers, and is hardy down to about -5. Brunera Jack Frost is very similar to the Alexander's Great that I grow in my garden. It has the same attractive leaf, however it is a slightly smaller variety. I grow a few pineapple lilies in my garden, but this Eucomis Frank Lawley has these lovely tall flowers topped with that typical pineapple crown. The ginkgo is one of my favourite trees, and the ginkgo tit is a more dwarf compact variety, as is the finger, which only grows to about 1.5 metres tall and is very slow growing. The tuberfolia grows to about 6 or 7 metres tall, and the leaves curl round to form this tube shape that gives it its name. In the oak wood there is a lovely big gunnera, which appears to be the manicata variety from the fact that the stems look to be green. Normally you can identify tinctoria from the pink colour to the stem, but unfortunately it is often missold as a manicata, and even the RHS here have mislabelled it by the looks of things. I grow Paulonia tomentosa in my garden. However, this variety, Paulonia fargesii, might be useful if you are growing it for the flowers rather than the larger leaves, as it produces flowers that are more frilly and pleated around the rim, but it will not produce flowers if pollarded back for the larger leaves. And if you're looking for the perfect bamboo, there are plenty of varieties here for inspiration. Plioblastis linearis grows up to 12 feet tall with distinctive, narrow, grassy foliage with slightly arching stems. It's hardy down to -20. Philostachys aureoculus grows 20 foot tall with a beautiful yellow stripe running through the cane. It's hardy down to -23 degrees. Pseudosassa japonica is one of the most invasive types of bamboo, known as the arrow bamboo. I've got it in my garden, but I grow it in a pot. It has beautiful, heavy, glossy, deep green leaves. Philostachys nigra is a very vigorous bamboo that grows 16 foot tall and has brown or black spots. Plioblastis simonii is a tough bamboo that can run but is normally not hard to control. It can reach 14 foot tall and survives down to -25 degrees. The Tsutsumiyama is also known as the green onion bamboo. It's easy to grow and not fussy at all about the conditions. However, it should be noted with all these bamboos that even with the clumping varieties, they can spread out of control. The Sasayella is a clumping bamboo and has an attractive white stripe running through the leaf. It's hardy down to about -10 to 15. I love this Crocosmia, Colton fishacre. It's one of the more hardy forms, with beautiful apricot flowers and a dusty bronzed colour to the leaf. The Tetrapanax papyrifer is very distinguished from the Rex variety by the orangey indamentum, or fuzz, and the leaves are more rounded than they are with the Rex variety. Pseudopanax crassifolius is an absolute marvel of the horticultural world, masquerading as a dead tree in order to avoid predation. It prefers slightly acidic soil and shelter from cold winds. The Smolanthus maculatus is a huge herbaceous perennial that produces yellow flowers in autumn. It's also known as the red sugar cane and is native to Central America. And one of the most attractive features about this plant is its wonderful mottled stem. The Mahonia soft caress is one of the first Mahonias produced with spine-free leaves. It's an evergreen shrub and it's hardy and low maintenance. And at the entrance to the glass house are these two beautiful Cyathea medullaris, also known as the black tree fern, with black ribbed fronds up to 5 meters long. This tree fern is fast growing, however it is not as hardy as the standard Dicksonia antarctica that a lot of us grow in our gardens. And talking of which, no trip to Wisley would be complete without visiting the garden centre. If you're anything like me, you don't take much persuading to come back with at least something new for the garden. And of course at Wisley you are not short of inspiration. So for me, I've added 2 new dahlias to my garden, as well as this beautiful agave, and an asparagus fern, which I'm going to be using in a project later this year. And keep an eye out for the next episode of Freya's Tropical Garden, where I will take you through the glass house. I hope you join me in the next episode of Freya's Tropical Garden, where you'll see part 2 of my Wisley tour around the tropical glasshouse. But coming up next, we're going to take a look at how to take cuttings in a bit more detail. Today I wanted to go into a little bit more detail about cuttings. Now, I'm sure some of you have been taking cuttings for years, but I want to go through a range of different methods, so that whether you're a complete beginner or you've been taking cuttings for years, hopefully there'll be something in this video that you'll find useful. A cutting is just a piece of plant material that is removed from the plant to propagate a genetically identical or cloned plant. There are 5 main types of cutting, which is hardwood, softwood, semi-ripe, root and leaf. However, as you'll see, there are a range of different methods for propagating cuttings, and some will work better than others with certain plants. Now, first of all, I just want to go into a little bit of detail about how you prepare a basic cutting. I have here a piece of plant material. This has been taken from my Gyrosine Herbstii, and I just want to show you the basics of what we're going to do with it, which is to remove all of these lower leaves, because leaves lose water through transpiration, and therefore by removing as many of these leaves as we can, then we're reducing the amount of water that this cutting is losing. At the moment it doesn't have any roots, so it can't take up any water in the way that a plant normally would. So now we've removed all the lower leaves, just leaving a couple of leaves on the top to help it photosynthesize. Now at the moment this cutting is a little bit too long. You can see all the leaf nodes coming down here. These are the points at which the leaf is growing from, and you want to take it back to about 6 leaf nodes, and it should be approximately about the length of your finger. So I'm going to cut just below the leaf node here, nice sharp cut straight across, and I have my cutting. Now I've placed my cuttings for now into my cuttings box, which is a sealed container with a layer of sphagnum moss and perlite, just to make sure it stays damp but the air can still get around the roots when they start to grow. A lot of people will take out a polythene bag just to make sure you don't lose too much water while you're collecting the rest of your cuttings before you get to process them. So the first type of cutting that I want to talk about today are softwood cuttings. With a softwood cutting, they're normally taken from the growth tip of the plant. Now the best time of year to take a softwood cutting is in spring, because the plant is in active growth, and it is this growth that's going to help stimulate the roots to grow. Of all the types of cuttings, softwood cuttings have the highest rate of success in growing new roots. However, also are the ones most likely to die in the process with rot, because they haven't got that woody exterior that helps to protect them, and they're losing a lot of water through transpiration. Now personally, my favourite method for propagating softwood cuttings is to use water. You can use water in a variety of different ways. You can either use an empty glass bottle that you've got lying around, or any container really that you can put water into and place the cutting into. Or you can use an aeroponic propagator, and this will spray the water around the roots while allowing the air to still circulate around the roots, which helps to prevent rot. The next type of cutting that I want to talk about is the greenwood cutting. Now this one's not so often talked about. It's kind of in between a softwood cutting and a semi-ripe cutting. And with the greenwood cutting, I'm going to use this bit of grapevine as an example. It hasn't turned woody, but it is a lot firmer than the softwood cutting. That extra rigidity is going to help to give that a bit more stability while it's trying to root. So the greenwood cutting is less likely to wilt than a softwood cutting, and it will be taken late spring into early summer. Next, I want to talk about the semi-ripe cutting. So this is a cutting where the stem has just started to turn a little bit woody down at the bottom, but is still soft, just like this softwood cutting would have been at the top. So you've still got the growth tip here, and it's just starting to firm up as you go down. Semi-ripe cuttings are taken midsummer to mid-autumn. The stems are beginning to harden, they're starting to become a bit more woody, and the tip of the stem is still soft, and they do need high humidity still to keep them from drying out. Now, semi-ripe cuttings might take a little bit longer to root than a softwood cutting, therefore it may be that it doesn't root until a little bit later in the year, and if it is still rooting through winter, it may need a little bit of extra protection against frosts. Either you bring it indoors or put it in a greenhouse or a cold frame. Hardwood cuttings are normally taken from deciduous trees or shrubs, and they'll be taken through late autumn through to winter, when the plant is dormant. With a deciduous tree, obviously it will lose its leaves through winter, therefore it won't be losing water through transpiration, and this will give it that little bit more time to root. And they do take longer to root from hardwood cuttings. Some cuttings may take up to a year to root. However, it does have overall a better success rate. Now, there's a couple of other types of cutting which aren't talked about quite so much. There's the evergreen cutting, which is very similar to a hardwood cutting. However, it's not taken from a deciduous tree or shrub. It's taken from an evergreen, so it does still have the leaves there, and therefore it is still going to lose water through transpiration. However, the process of taking an evergreen cutting is still very similar to taking a hardwood cutting. Now, with evergreens, of course, you can take them as softwood or semi-ripe cuttings earlier in the year with the new growth. However, if you are taking it later in the year, it's not a good idea to cover it with a polythene bag, because that would actually encourage more rot. You can pretty much ignore it through the winter months. The main thing to watch out for is to make sure that it doesn't dry out in hot summers. A variation of the cuttings that I've just talked about is called a heel cutting. And this is a cutting where when you're taking a side shoot off the plant, you leave a little bit of that woody heel from the main trunk on that cutting, and that will just give it a little bit of extra protection against rot, so that once I've removed these lower leaves and prepared the cutting in the way that we prepared the other cutting earlier, then what you're left with just has that little bit extra firmness there at the bottom. And then, just like the heel cutting, we've got the mallet cutting. This is very similar. You've got a side shoot that was growing off a main stem, and you've cut the main stem either side of the side shoot. Once you've put this in your growing medium, then that is going to help protect your side shoot from rotting. So it will increase the success rate of your cutting rooting. The next type of cutting that I want to talk about is root cuttings. Root cuttings are normally taken in winter when the plant is dormant. It's important to remember that the root needs to be large enough to store enough energy to be able to produce new roots and shoots, because it won't yet have any leaves to produce food. So a small root like this is probably not going to work, whereas a larger one like this has a much better chance of propagating. Root cuttings are more likely to be successful with plants that naturally produce pups, like the tetrapanics. When you're taking root cuttings, you should always try to remember to take them from as close to the crown of the plant as possible. When preparing your root cutting, it's important to know which part is at the top and which part goes down into the ground, because that will make a difference to it when it's growing. So when you're preparing your root cutting, just going to simply snip away the section at the top and at the bottom, so that you've got a nice segment of root here, and then you're going to plant that root into your growing medium. Now, some plants can be propagated through whole leaf cuttings or even sections of leaf cuttings. With the sections of leaves, a begonia is absolutely perfect. And if you have a begonia rex leaf, which is very veined, as you can see here, then this would make a perfect cutting of a sectional leaf cutting. A whole leaf cutting works best with things like succulents. So I'm going to be very careful using the tongs to handle this cactus. Something like this opuntia, I have cut off a section of the opuntia, which is the equivalent of a whole leaf, and this will make a perfect cutting. I'm just going to pop this into my growing medium and allow that to root. So the final type of cutting that I want to talk about today is layering or air layering. Now, this is a perfect technique if you want to make sure that the cutting remains alive while it is forming roots. This is a technique in which you will make a cut in the stem of the plant and put damp soil or sphagnum moss to cover the wound that you've just made. Then this growing medium will promote root growth. The roots will be able to develop while the main plant is still keeping your cutting alive, and then once you have a root ball, you can remove the cutting from the main plant and you will have a whole new plant. Some plants do air layering naturally. They will produce runners, and the new plants will form on these runners so that the parent plant can keep it alive while the new plant is growing. If the stem of your plant can actually reach the soil, then that's perfect for layering, because then you can just use a heavy stone or a brick to weigh that stem down where you've put the wound, and then that weight will keep the contact with the soil until the roots have warmed. And finally, I just want to recommend this book by the Royal Horticultural Society on propagating plants. This will have all the information that you need to propagate cuttings, including the methods of how to do it, but also very specific information about individual plants, which will help you know which types of cuttings will work best with different types of plants. There's still time to enter my competition to win canna plants. If you haven't entered already, the deadline's on the 1st of September, so make sure you get your entries in. Here's how you can enter. Now it's competition time. I'm running a new competition to win some canna plants from my garden, and I have 5 prizes available, including canna patterns, canna musifolia, canna Cleopatra, canna Russian red, and a lovely red variety of canna with beautiful red leaves and red flowers. All you need to do to enter is to share this post on either Twitter, Instagram, or on Facebook. Make sure you're following that account and comment on the post to confirm that you live in the UK. Details of how to follow these accounts will be at the end of this video and links are in the description. Well, that's all we've got time for today. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. As always, if you haven't already subscribed to this channel, please make sure you hit that subscribe button because your support really does help this channel to continue to grow. If you're enjoying this content, then please do make sure you're subscribed to my channel. This is still a new channel, so every subscriber really does make a difference. You can also turn on notifications to make sure you don't miss any of my new videos. And please let me know what you think in the comments because they really do help my channel to grow. You can also follow me on social media for links to my latest videos and my photo of the day, in which I usually share photos of flowers from my garden, along with their names if known. You can follow me on Facebook, on Twitter, Instagram, Threads, or you can join my Facebook group to ask questions or share photos. And you can find all of my YouTube videos on the Freya's Tropical Garden website, which I will also be expanding to provide advice pages as well as items for sale. Links to these pages are included in my description.